Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Lambda Show. I'm your host, Matt Moore, and with me tonight is JP Fairfield, who I've had the absolute pleasure of working with in the past at a previous company. She is joining us tonight after 10 years of experience in the industry because I have a bunch of questions about test engineering topics, and I've got my thoughts on certain things, but I wanted to kind of throw those thoughts out at JP and understand sort of her background on that, since she's done more of that work on that side than I have. And a topic in particular of tonight we're going to focus on is this concept of software engineers working on a project and then throwing it over the fence at QA to go then deal with. And how frustrating that can be, and kind of the relationship and dynamic between QA and software engineers needing to work together better to ensure quality overall. So we're going to go over some thoughts on that. We're also going to talk about automated and manual testing, and kind of hoping to pick her brain on some of those topics. It can be a bit of an argument sometimes between folks, but we'll get into that. Hoping to talk a little bit about personas. What is a persona? We'll dive into that as well. I am not an expert, so hoping to kind of bounce some of these ideas around there too. And then I want to kind of get her thoughts overall on how software shops can improve quality across the board, and how everybody can kind of pitch in, what some of the pitfalls are that companies fall into around that. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. So yeah, let's get into this topic. Now, I originally thought about this topic as I think you and I have kind of discussed it before, and you've had unfortunately during this COVID time, like, we've not had a chance to talk much lately. It's just social life has been so disconnected now. But you've had a couple tweets out there I've seen, and it's interesting because it's a problem that I struggle with myself, and I want to sort of get your perspective on that, as mentioned in the intro. So tell me, you can rage here if you want, be frustrated. What is this phenomenon of software engineers just throwing things over the fence? Because I feel like, as a software engineer, I'll give you my side of this. A lot of times we're working on a problem and we just want to kind of get it working. And then it's like, all right, it's done. We got to meet timelines. Like, who's going to verify it all works? QA, that's their job, right? Here you go. Yours, Jen. Take it away. And then you're stuck with that chaos. Is it chaos? Is it a problem? Give me your thoughts.
Yes, it is a problem. I think with a lot of companies, sometimes I think they're just winging it when they decide to create a testing team, and they don't really think about, okay, how are we going to create an environment where developers and test engineers can collaborate.
Interesting, yeah.
Especially in Agile. If you're using Scrum, like, you should really be having a lot of communication, foster a lot of communication between the developers and test engineers. Because one, if you have a definition of done that involves that whole team, somewhere along the line, someone's going to have to talk to somebody else. You can't just throw it over the wall.
Are you saying people should communicate with each other?
Yes, I know. Isn't that weird? And I know this concept is even harder in companies that use like Waterfall or V model, because you might have entire teams that really don't talk to each other. They just pass on, okay, so we did all this documentation, we have the code, we're just gonna move it to this staging environment. Okay, test engineers, there you go, have fun. Here's all the documentation. Call us when there's a defect. So, so I've seen that problem really heightened in those type of environments because they might not even be in the same building, you know.
Interesting point. I'm gonna ask you. It might be an obvious question, but sort of related to this: Agile versus Waterfall, and obviously there's the many different Agile forms out there. You
Yeah.
mentioned Scrum as one possible variant. I take it you're not very fond of Waterfall in general.
I feel like Waterfall has its place. Um, with every software development lifecycle, it has its pros and cons. I'm used to. I did a lot of work on the V model version, which is a kind of offshoot from Waterfall to kind of um, target some of the cons. Um, so V model can work if you, once again, communication.
Yeah, I was gonna say you mentioned V model. I've never heard of this before.
Yeah.
You've got me interested.
Yeah. So for V model, you have the flow looks like a V. So when you have in Waterfall, you have it going straight down, and everything is pushed, whether it's finished or not. Hey, it's getting pushed to the next phase. With the V model, it's more like a V. So at each point of the V, so there's a line that is going across. So you have verify and validation. So you are pretty much, it's almost like a double waterfall that's going.
Okay.
I don't know how to explain it
Okay.
without giving you a whole history of the V model, but
No, that's cool.
but the whole point is that as you are planning, when you're executing, you're looking over your plan and making sure, hey, are we doing what our plan says? Are we actually at this point, are we doing what the customer wants? So that when you get near the end, you had double checked if you validated, your criteria, if you verify that your criteria is actually what was built.
Gotcha. Okay. Are there sort of stages in that V model kind of similar? Like, because with Agile, and I know we're sort of getting into Agile here, which, by the way, audience, there was a earlier episode this year with my friend Corinne Malouf. You should check out on Agile. We kind of got into some. We didn't talk about V model though. Are there sort of like stages, kind of like small iteration stages that you do in the V model to kind of help verify that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just like how you, so all of the life cycles pretty much have the same phases. It's just how fast you get to that phase and what you do in that phase. Like Waterfall and V model pretty much have almost the same phases, except V model is a little bit more stretched out because you're doing the validation and verification from like your functional tests, your user acceptance tests. So you're going through each of those phases. It's just what do you do at those phases that
Gotcha.
is slightly different.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I find this topic interesting because like years ago I used to do Waterfall, as it sounds like you've obviously done in your career at some point, and then we switched over to this Agile thing, and it was like kind of like what you said. And my question at the beginning was, or my statement was, it seemed like you maybe didn't like Waterfall, but I kind of agree with what you said though, which is that there seems to be value to them depending on the type of project that you have. I almost wonder if like really big, massive projects that are highly structured in nature might actually work well with something like that. But going back to, so like testing, you mentioned functional tests and all that, which is one of the test topics I want to get into. I want to kind of dive into these different tests. Like we hear these all the time in the engineering world. It's We got functional tests, unit tests, integration tests. And honestly, I feel like, and maybe this gets to sort of the core of the topic tonight, like, I feel like a lot of software engineers don't actually fully understand what those tests are, like what those words really mean. And I'm hoping you can kind of shed light on that. If you could just like give a quick overview of like the sort of, 2 or 3 of those like types of tests, like what's the difference between a functional test and a unit test and an integration test? And what are they useful for?
So for unit tests, this is the smallest piece that you could possibly have for a test. And it's supposed to be based on a module in your code that you're testing to see if it works. That's it. Does this module work? Cool. All right. Let's move on. And then there are integration tests. So here is where people get confused because there are actually 2 types of integration tests.
I'm already confused.
So after unit tests, you have component integration tests. So it's just a step up from unit testing. Now you are testing the interaction between 2 modules.
Okay.
Is the module passing the right data to this module? It does, yay. If it doesn't, okay, something is wrong. And then you have, after that, system testing, which is functional testing. It's so many different variation of what people call stuff, but either way it goes, it's more of higher level testing, black box testing. You're not really testing the code. You're just testing the functional or the features of a application. And you're not worried about it interacting with other systems. You're just concentrate on that particular application or system. And you're testing against criteria that the code is based on. And then here's the other integration testing, system integration testing, where you are just testing the interaction between systems. Are we passing the correct information? Are we receiving the right information? What happens if one system fails? If system A fails, what does system B do? So
interesting.
Yeah.
I got questions for you on that one.
Sure.
Because let me give you sort of an example of, well, I mean, this is a problem everybody deals with, but I'm thinking about this right now where I'm currently at work. And when you're testing, like, let's say you have 2 different services, for example, and this is the classic case of like, okay, we've created all these microservices, great. Now how do we test them?
Right.
I've seen a couple different variations done on this. So you can have like your typical, mock server sort of idea set up where it's like service A is dependent on service B, but excuse me, but service B in the case of the test is just going to be a set of pre-recorded request and response type things.
Right.
And then there's other ideas around that. Like some people say, yeah, go use a mock server, spin it up. And I'm wondering if there's any other thoughts you have on like, is that an ideal way to do this? Or is there something better out there? Like you can have, when you're doing sort of not at that level, right? You're more on the integration test level, or even the unit test level. You can sort of mock things out in your code when you're writing automated tests. But yeah, for this like system to system testing where you're trying to make sure all these dependencies match up. What are your thoughts on that? Because I don't know that I know myself, like I'm not settled on the best way to handle that. I feel like this is it's a challenging problem to solve.
Yeah, like I don't do that much system integration testing, but the little bit that I have done, personally, I don't feel like there is one right way. It really depends on, one, how your systems are set up, and 2, how your how your data is set up. Like, is it easy for you to create data on the fly? Do you does your team already have mocking in place? Because if they already have mocking in place, use what you already have.
Yeah.
But if you're starting from scratch, I would say kind of research different strategies beforehand. But I don't feel like there is one strategy that's right. I feel like you have to investigate what will work for your particular team's needs. So too many times people try to fit a circle into a square peg, and that's not really how you should think of it. Like, there is no best strategy out there. It's pretty much what works for our team, what works with the resources that we have, what tools do we have available now.
Darn it, I knew I spent too much time on trying to get circles and squares to line up. No, that's an interesting comment. I agree with you. I think there is something about this. Kind of goes back to communication thing you mentioned earlier. Like, your teammates need to talk to each other, figure this out.
Don't be scared to throw out a strategy either. If you find that mocking does not work at all for your company, why keep using it?
Good question. We had kind of a little mini story here. Not my current place. This is like 3 jobs ago, something like that. We had this similar setup with like a mock server, and like, it turns out we had hard coded all of these conditionals into that server. This is like going back years and years ago. A bunch of people had their hands in this thing, and one day the server just died. And we're like, hey, we need to get that up and running. And they're like, oh, we may not be able to resurrect the server. Or like, is anyone backing up all the code and the data on the server? Oh, it turns out it's not on a backup schedule.
Oh, no.
We're just like, what? Like, we've got 7,000 automated tests that heavily rely on this. How are we gonna, so I guess moral of that story is, if you have a test, first of all, always back your stuff up. And secondly, if you have a test server like that, make sure you have a way to understand the logic that's on it. That was a scary moment. The final line of that story was we were able to get it back up and running, and then we set up a backup cron job. But I want to talk about automated testing versus manual testing. I'm kind of a fan of automating as many things as possible, but something I've run into and would like to get your thoughts on is, I feel like, so mentioning the 7,000 test scenario, that's a lot of tests. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of information that, like, there were cases where we'd look back and see this and be like, I don't understand 1,000 of these that I've looked over the past few weeks. Like, literally, are they even serving any purpose? I don't know. And the more people, of course, work on that system, the more that happens. And you get to a point where, like, my confidence in my tests is, at this point, I have to practically say 0.
Right.
How do you keep, first of all, what are your thoughts on, like, sort of the boundary between, like, automated versus manual testing? And do you think there's a good way to sort of keep people on track with automated tests in terms of not letting that kind of stagnate over time?
Well, the first thing is, I don't think it's either or, especially in terms of system testing. You need automated, and you need manual, and you need exploratory testing. If you have test engineers, they should be able to do all 3. Okay. So automated tests, it's a tool. The whole concept around automated tests is so test engineers are not spending weeks doing regression, every couple of months. So if those are running, every day, if something goes wrong, you get a warning right away. So, and also, honestly, if I hear people say, let's automate all the things. I'm going to hit you on the hand because no, don't automate all the things.
But I want to.
Everything doesn't need to be automated.
Okay.
So I would say if you're going to start automation, you need to look at your test cases and figure out what is your critical path test. What tests that if this broke in production, you would get a call saying the sky is falling.
Okay.
So those are always the tests that you automate first because they would tell you a system breaking change. And a lot of people need to try to follow as closely as possible the testing pyramid. So if you have more system tests than you do unit tests, you are not following the testing pyramid.
Interesting. Tell us about this pyramid.
Yeah, so there is a concept where as you go up in terms of higher levels of testing, you should have less tests. Unit tests, because they're testing at the module or component level, should be a lot more than if you're doing exploratory tests, which is at the top, or user acceptance. Some people don't put exploratory at the top. Some people just do user acceptance. Either way, either or, that should be less tests. So you have unit tests, integration tests, system tests, manual user acceptance tests, and manual exploratory. So
I guess that makes complete sense, actually. Because I'm just thinking in my mind as you're saying this, like I'm imagining some function that does like 10 other function calls in it. Mm-hmm. Each one of those functions, of course, would need a test, but at the unit test level. But then, yeah, as you move further up, it's like, okay, now you have some functional set of test suites that's executing these higher level functions. There should be fewer. That completely makes sense. Yeah, it's good. The pyramid you said, the test pyramid?
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept. I feel like I've heard this term around before, but not super familiar with it. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Cool.
I learned me another thing tonight. This is great. So, all right. So both are needed is the takeaway here then. You need manual and automated.
Yep.
Okay. Because you don't want to be doing 3 weeks worth of testing is what I heard.
Yes, I don't want to do all that regression.
Is it fair to say that $1 million a year is not enough to make you want to do that?
I don't know. Up into 2, I might consider it.
Oh, I sometimes wonder if companies end up spending that much on manual testing on silly small things that should be automated, because I've seen that go on before, and I've wondered to myself, like, how many salaries are we paying for that, as opposed to like, let's automate some of this and free up the test engineer's time. I did want to talk about this concept of personas. I know we'd kind of you and I had discussed this a little bit before, and disclaimer for my audience, I am not an expert on the concept of personas, but my understanding of this is, so in our earlier conversation, we were talking about, it's sort of like user acceptance testing or user story, where you have actors that are executing some functionality in the system. And the concept of personas, as I understand it, is so as you're working through your sprint, say you're using Agile Scrum, mm-hmm. and you've got your user stories, and you've identified what those actors should be, and you start, putting together a list of criteria, acceptance criteria, preconditions, like, this user is from, I don't know, let's pick an app where geography matters. So this user is from California or Illinois, and they've got criteria A, B, and C that applies to them, but in different configurations, and we want to call that user something. So yeah, you would typically do that in your story, and then you would go execute that. acceptance criteria. But with a persona, I think really the key thing from what I understand is that you're taking those actors and those paths in the system, those preconditions, and you're sort of extracting those out and putting them in a centralized place, if you will. Now we can get into, and I actually am curious about how this could be best automated, but even just talking about this from a manual perspective, it's like if I know how to set up the preconditions in a way that's consistent across the board, and 3 sprints from now, I have to go work on some part of the system that affects that area and need to go do regression testing to make sure nothing's broken. I'm specifying that so my audience knows what regression testing is in case they don't know. So yeah, you would sort of, because I guess what this is getting at is, as you're doing user stories in Agile, this is actually, in my opinion, kind of one of the weaknesses to Agile, and it relates a lot to regression testing, is as we're going on and working every 2 weeks in a typical sprint, we just, again, sort of get things tested and out the door, and then we just want to move on to the next 2 weeks or the next project. And you start to then at some point have to go back and look at your regression cases. And a lot of times you can't very easily. Right. It seems to me like almost every company I've worked at, it's always been a case of, well, what did it do 6 months ago? I don't know. What should it do? Says the engineer and test engineer back to business. And the business is like, well, what does it do now? I don't know. Let me log in. Click, click, click. All right. Looks like it's doing this. Okay, cool. So we know what it's doing, except that I missed 40 other scenarios where it does something a little differently. And so like having a sort of collection of all of those scenarios together where some of the ideas I've heard posted around are like, oh, well, you can put together a user, you could generically call it user A, but it'll be like, let's call this user Sally, or we'll call that user James or whatever. And that give it some kind of like sort of almost personal characteristics of like, this person is falling into all of these categories in the system and things we need to execute and test. So that we can then take that, hopefully at some point you can automate that and execute that as part of your regression suite. But now we can say, give me user John 231. I don't know. And that's not a Bible quote, by the way. It just really sounded like that when I said it. And let's go execute that test case and figure out. And that person represents some area or percentage of the demographic of the total user base. And you can sort of just always execute that over and over again. And before I turn this over to you, because I want to get your thoughts on this, I think one of the key issues here is not just writing the test for this scenario, but something you said earlier in the episode is about getting your data set up correctly. You would have to have data as well, obviously, kind of attached to that user, that persona, and be able to sort of set up that user and everything in an automated way, if at all possible, so it's consistently reproducible. That user can be actually set up correctly. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that concept?
Just a caveat, I am not an expert on personas either.
You're more of an expert on testing in general than me. So
and honestly, I feel like personas, at least the idea of personas, is just maybe a step up from use case testing, which brings in the idea of a particular actor who goes through a path within the application and expects certain things to happen. So the little bit that I read about personas is bringing in more of the idea of the performance that the actor expects, the accessibility that the actor expects. So I would say that it is possible to automate it, but I feel like it'll be a little bit tricky. Because you can automate use case testing. but bring in all of those extra things like, okay, what is the expected performance from this? Let's say this is a person from marketing. What is the expected performance for this person for marketing? What path would they use in the system to do certain things? Because you're not going to get all that data from one place. So it's really, once again, communication and having data to back you up. So if you have the application and you are doing Google Analytics, you need to use those analytics to set up the personas, because marketing is using certain path in the application, but maybe the administrative assistants are using a totally different path. So where are you going to get that data? How do you know what paths do they use in the application? You kind of have to analyze that data of how they do it in production.
There's something you said there about performance that I want to really draw attention to, because it's actually an area I hadn't ever thought of before. Mm-hmm. And you talked about performance and using those analytics. If I've got, let's say, depending on what software I have, let's say 20% of my users are marketing specialists. They're going to probably execute other parts of the system that, like, let's say a software shop is using your software, and it's 20% marketing and 80% engineering. I'm trying to keep the numbers simple, folks. That is not as simple as the company works out. But you'd want to exercise sort of that volume, I think, at scale to represent those proportions, maybe, and make sure that your performance holds up under that kind of load. It's just appreciate that pointing that out. I'd never thought of that in the context of performance.
Yeah, and you might have impatient users. So what segment of your users are impatient that will click a button 10 million times if it doesn't, immediately show the next page?
I tend to be one of those impatient users. I clicked this already. Why is it not going anywhere? It's been 2 seconds.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's possible. And I feel like it's just use case testing, bringing in other test approaches like accessibility, performance, UI testing. So it's pretty much marrying those other approaches together, which is a very interesting idea, because instead of just testing those in isolation, you are creating a whole central system targeting all those at the same time.
Interesting. I definitely like to pursue this a little bit where I'm at and see my company and see how that goes. I was going to ask you, sort of as a connected to this idea, are you your work experience? Do you have any recommended ways in terms of like, excuse me, like how to set up data for test users? Like, some thoughts I have in the top of my head are like, we've got a JSON file that maybe represents some of that test data that we then load in, or are there tools out there that are really good for this kind of thing, like setting up a test user or some kind of, necessary precondition to some data you need to load in the system? Or is it kind of just do it by hand?
Oh, no, don't do it by hand. If you can, don't do it by hand. Especially if you have automation, don't do it. It's horrible. Depending on what framework you are using for your test automation, and if you have APIs, I know right now how we are creating data is a mix of, we actually create it through the UI, through the automation, and we also are using API calls. API calls are preferred because they're a lot faster, and you can create the data on the fly. And we do have a test data environment, which will have a gold standard of data. So any data that we want there to be permanently will be there. And all of our tests are creating the data on the fly. Now, is it perfect? No, but it's the strategy that our team felt was the best approach. Some people actually might have a whole different strategy where I know at previous companies, they, I can't remember the tool name, but it was the same concept as a data server, and you just kind of pick what data you wanted to grab from that server, and it'll spin up an environment with just that data.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what else? I think. Sorry, I'm trying to think of other ways I had to deal with test data, but mostly I prefer doing API calls.
Okay. That would make sense. Yeah. Of
Yeah.
course, you have to actually have an API to do that, right?
Yeah, I know that would be great. That would be great.
So
It's kind of hard when you don't have API calls. Otherwise, you either have to have a database that you just scrub and then repopulate, or some companies do this. They pull down production data, scrub it, and that is your test data.
yeah, we do that as well. Sometimes it's actually interesting in our case because whenever we try to pull in like data like that. So on my team, we do a lot of like big data processing, and so we get these giant files sometimes that we have to work with that can take hours to process per file. And I've kind of like, when we're testing stuff, been like, okay, I'm making this change of this code, one line change, but it could break this file that is going to expand out to, when it's fully processed, potentially hundreds of gigabytes in size. And I have to wait 7 hours before I know whether this thing fully worked or not. And I'd really like to, from a testing perspective, and I've thrown this idea out there, and I think people kind of like, yeah, we need to really do this at some point, but it's going to take time, and you know how that goes with roadmaps and all. So, like, I want to take those, talking about scrubbing data, like those massive data sets, and be able to just like take the top 10 records across them. It's a little more difficult in our data sets than probably most, because we get a lot of interconnected data where it's like you can't just truncate or take the X number of rows or whatever. It's different files are referencing other things, and some of this data is hierarchical in nature as well. So you have to like climb down through child nodes and do all of that. So it's a bit of a pain the way the structure works. But yeah, I maybe there aren't, and maybe I'm completely wishful thinking here, but do you know are there any tools out there for this kind of thing, like scrubbing tools, or is this just going to be like a process where somebody has to sit down and write a script to do this type of thing?
Yeah, I can't really think of anything because I don't really do a lot of scrubbing.
Yeah.
So I wish I could.
No, that's fair. Like I said, I've asked this question around and people are just like, shoulder shrug. So, wasn't necessarily expecting you to have all the magical answers on that. I was curious though, because like nobody does. So
They're still trying to. Whoever figures it out is going to make a lot of money.
So I wonder if this might be a product, right? This might be a product idea.
Right.
Like
you know what? I haven't really researched about scrubbing tools, but I'll be interested to see what's out there right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't done a ton of research in this, but if you do find something, let me know. Because it would very much help us. Because you really do just have, like, in our case, be very cautious that the code change makes as much logical sense as 2 or 3 people can put their heads together on, and then run it. And wait. All right, as we start to close up here, I wanted to ask you, just in general. I mean, we've talked about like communication. We've talked about some of these general concepts. What are things that maybe, like, to help communication to start with? What are things that you think teams, and is this more a management thing or a team thing or both? What kind of things do you think that companies should do to try to improve communication between? Well, really all of the members of the team, but especially, from a quality perspective, getting test engineers, software engineers, whatever, to get together and talk more and plan stuff out.
And this might be a little mini rant.
Go for it. Go for it. We love rants on this show. No, go for it.
A lot of times, test engineers or testing teams are treated as a optional.
Ooh, interesting. You just called it out right there.
And which kind of goes into this weird dynamic where if you have a deadline or a release date, that test engineers kind of get the shortest straw on that. So it's never about.
It's almost like engineers go, we have a 2-week sprint. That gives me a week and a half. What's up with you, QAs? Why can't you? Come on, I gave you 2 days.
Yeah.
Is that how it goes?
So problem number 1, QA is seen as a optional thing, and it should be part of the life cycle. 2, which is a problem that I see a lot, people don't think about quality until it is time to do testing. And quality is something that should be thought about from the moment you write a ticket or a documentation until you actually push stuff into production. There's the idea of, I don't have to think about the quality of this until it gets to the test engineer, which is not very good, because you have a concept called static testing, which is pretty much, let's look over documentation, let's look over the user stories. Does this criteria make sense?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because you can find a lot of mistakes. So let's say you might have a acceptance criteria that says, turn off this button when a particular user logs in. So, okay, turn off, the IT page if a marketing person logs in. What if you have a IT person that just works in marketing?
Ooh.
Like, oops.
That's when my head explodes.
Like, oops, now this person, maybe it's like they have it set up that an IT person is, allocated to each department. So now they can't even log in to see, the IT page, because they're not marked as, part of marketing. So I know that's a bad example, but work with me here.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned the whole people just like that QA process has to be part of the story up front. But I almost go so far as to say that maybe test engineers and software engineers should pair up on the process early on as part of that communication thing. Like I think like a lot of companies, you think about pairing, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to have engineer so-and-so and engineer so-and-so get together and pair for a couple hours in this. But why not include your test engineer on that too?
Yeah. I know uh, a couple times when I end up pairing with software engineers, it was mostly to kind of look through their unit tests. So they like, okay, here are my unit tests. These are the criteria that I'm testing against. Am I missing anything? Is this good? Yeah, you're missing A, B, and C. Okay, great. Let me add that to my unit test. So you can do that. If you are creating UI, especially if a test engineer is automating it, give them a first look at the UI that you're creating. The difference between a Dropbox, a drop down, and a text box. Let them know what they're automating against. Put IDs. Oh my God, please put element attributes IDs, because if I have to do an XPath that is like super long, I'm gonna come to your desk and like, you see this XPath? This is too much. I can't do descended and parent and all this.
I know what you mean. I've seen some of those XPaths that can get really, really, really deep, and it's pretty insane.
Yeah.
Because you can't tell what it is.
Be nice to your automation test engineer and put IDs or names. IDs or names. Anything that's unique.
Yeah.
Put it in there.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I was on the whole issue of like companies treating QA as optional. There was a company I interviewed at years ago. I will not identify the name of the company, but it's a pretty well-known one in the city of Chicago. And I asked the question, what do you folks do for QA? Like, do you have dedicated test engineers? And they kind of looked at me funny. I think we were at the lunch. It was like the interview lunch, which was a pretty decent restaurant I don't remember the name of now. But anyway, they just kind of looked at me funny and they went, oh no, we don't need to do that. I was like, what do you mean? They said, we're engineers. We're so good at what we do here. We write our own automated tests and we have faith in them. And I'm like, the ego, like, let's push that down just a little bit. Just a little bit. Hold on a second.
What type of automated test? Because
there was not a whole lot of, and there's more I want to say on this. Like, maybe I'll share with you off this call, because I don't want to identify that company. But I just was like, my mind was blown. The attitude they had towards it was very, just like, we don't need QAs. Okay, because something I personally do not agree with this. Part of what I think a test engineer brings to the table beyond a software engineer is, again, this goes back to what I said earlier about software engineers are just focused. We're just trying to get the thing to work, sort of happy path. Mm-hmm. That tends to be where our mindset's at. And look, very skilled, the more senior you get and the better you get at your job, like, you're going to get better at picking all those different what if scenarios. Mm-hmm. But you're still going to miss something. And you had talked about like one of your jobs would be nice to be able to do is like go and actually have time to do more exploratory testing to kind of like find ways to, I assume this is what you mean by that, like find ways to sort of like break the system or see what kind of weird things it might do. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of what you meant by exploratory testing?
Yeah. And just trying different paths in the application to see, okay, what if this end user decide to do it this way? So yeah, it's mostly trying to find those edge cases, which is the whole benefit to automating your tests to use for regression, because then now you have time to do more exploratory.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that was my story of very. It was crazy to me. It was just like, okay, I had never worked at a company where you didn't have QAs, and I don't know that I ever would want to. But
Yeah. I know in my experience, the minute they decide that they don't need as many QAs, the amount of bugs they have in incidents, production incidents go up
interesting.
every time. I'm just like,
I mean, who's looking at data, right?
right, right. So, I mean, there is a particular skill set. If you don't think you need QAs, but you're hiring software, engineers that have that mindset as well, I guess it could work. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it is possible to make it work. I just very rarely have seen that be the case.
Yeah.
And I sort of almost think it was like, if you have a good test engineer, it's almost like you're sort of hacking the code I'm writing. You're trying to like get in there and break my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which might seem like kind of an insult to some engineers who, if QA is breaking code.
Some would take it really personally, and I'm like, I'm just trying to find bugs. I'm just trying to make you look better.
Yes, exactly. No, I always,
because if something works, they're not going to congratulate me. They're going to congratulate the engineer.
Oh, that's awesome. I would rather have someone like you help me find a bug rather than at customers while it's in production. So
right.
That's always never a good thing. Was there anything you wanted to comment on tonight?
Yeah, I think I wanted to kind of go over like more things that you can do to kind of improve like at least the relationship between software engineers and test engineers. So
absolutely,
because I think I already mentioned, seeing QA as an optional. What was the other thing I mentioned? Oh my God, I forgot that quickly.
That's why it's being recorded, but I don't have instant recall, unfortunately.
But also this probably goes into management. Learn how to manage like test engineers. You might have managers who are used to managing developers, and they might get test engineers as well. Because there's some companies that they don't have a separate test manager. They just have just an overall manager, but they're used to managing developers. Test engineers have a different viewpoint than a software engineer. And being able to understand that kind of helps with the communication. And also make sure you understand your bias, because I shouldn't have to jump up and scream about something that's wrong, and a software engineer be like, well, it's technically, a feature of and I was just like, no, end user will hate this. So being able to support your test engineers, because as I mentioned earlier, when we find bugs, you might have a engineer who feels persecuted. So like give them support, give them the tools that they need to effectively test.
Yeah. You wanted to quickly ask you about, you mentioned or comment on that. You mentioned having a separate manager for test engineers. That's an interesting idea, and I've seen a combination of that plus sort of what we do at my place is we have the test engineers on the teams, the dev team, and like mine has one assigned, but we also have the. Now I know at a prior company you and I shared, we had the concept. I'm trying to remember what did you all call it? It was chapters. Was that the one? That concept.
Yeah.
Do you have currently like a separate managed team or of test engineers currently?
Yeah, we have a separate test engineer manager now.
Okay. Yeah, we sort of have this kind of equivalent concept of the chapter idea. What do we call it? Test advocacy, I think, is what we call our thing. And it's like they'll get together and they'll sort of work through that stuff. But we also do have someone dedicate each team. So, are you folks still dedicated? Like each test engineer is still dedicated. Like you might have a separate manager, but are you like dedicated to a specific team through that process to go help that team? Okay, so you're not like having to jump around from team to team to team.
No.
Okay, I think that might be key. I'm curious if you think so too, because like I feel like as a test engineer, if you had to jump, even if you have a dedicated manager on the side, I feel like if you had to jump from like team to team, that would be hard. You'd have to like constantly be relearning different systems or at least parts of the system.
Yeah, because you would have to be really knowledgeable about the system at large. Because I have been on teams where it was a separate test engineer team and they wasn't on a developer team or whatever you want to call it. So we still had a test manager, but we kind of we didn't concentrate on a particular feature team's code. We just, whatever came in. And so we might split up the tests between us, and you kind of try to have people who are more experienced in one area to do the testing. But it was pretty much okay. And honestly, this happens kind of, at least when I was in companies that did V model, you kind of didn't come into the picture until everything was developed.
Ooh.
And then you have a whole test engineering team that created their test cases, and then had their own kind of project, which is their project was just testing. And then every week you kind of go into this triage meeting with the developer manager, and kind of go through, okay, this is what we found. You know, when I gotta put your fix, blah blah blah. So yeah.
Was that a pain to deal with?
It depends.
Okay.
It really depends. Honestly, I know I keep saying it depends, but I have been on V model projects that was set up this way that went so smoothly. I'm like, this is awesome. And then it was some where I'm just like, why are we still in this meeting? What is going on? Why is everything cannot reproduce? I can reproduce it right now.
Interesting. Okay. Actually, on that theme, when you're talking about, back to the communication theme there, are you a fan of this sort of ad hoc meetings with members of the team? Just like, hey, let's go figure this out together type of thing. Or do you think like more formal? This is a slightly different style of question, not just related to test engineering, but do you think at like ad hoc meetings like that are more productive, or do you think official meetings with potentially lots of people are more productive?
I probably would prefer ad hoc. I don't like too many formal meetings because the tendency that I've seen, and honestly, I probably did this myself, is you kind of just trying to fill up the time because you know it's gonna, you know, you have to go to this meeting. Like, okay, how am I gonna fill this up? Because we got an hour. Um, Instead of just saying, "Hey, we finish in 15 minutes. Let's just leave the meeting."
Yeah.
I prefer more ad hoc. Like, not everyone needs to be part of the conversation. I think only I think the only formal meetings you should have is one that you need the whole team to be there.
Gotcha. That makes sense. All right.
All right.
Any final thoughts or comments?
Please treat your test engineers nice. We don't like our job is to find bugs. Like it's not anything against you.
And there you've heard it, folks. No, seriously, that's a good takeaway. I think that's really the key to this whole thing is work with each other, start from a place of empathy, and yeah, right. Like try to help your team in general produce software that is high quality. And I think part of what helps on this too is like making sure that you pick the right people for that team to begin with, people who don't let their egos get in the way of them. And you and I have both had experiences with that in the past.
Yeah.
There is nothing that will damage a team more than a toxic ego. Sadly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we're coming up on 7:30 here. I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to go ahead and actually want to ask you one last question here. Totally forgot. How can people find you if they're interested on Twitter or wherever? Do you have a website? And yeah, people want to kind of follow along. And also, are you doing any what kind of projects and stuff are you doing these days of interest or note?
So I'm mostly on Twitter. I do have a website, but it's not updated, and I'm probably not going to update it because I always forget.
I feel like that's how every website always turns out. There's like, I'm going to build this website and it's going to be amazing in my central piece. And then like 6 months later, wow, I haven't updated that in 6 months.
Yeah. I was like, okay, it'll be simple. Just do a WordPress site. And then I'm like, oh, this is really old. But you can find me on Twitter at ISITIS, ISITIS. Please, I will warn you, I do not just talk about testing on there. So if you want to talk about testing, you can at me, but it's a little bit chaotic.
That's okay. By the way, I feel I need to say this too. Twitter doesn't have to be a purely professional endeavor, folks. It's okay to blast all kinds of stuff from your Twitter. And people should be allowed to do that. And, yeah.
Maybe I'll try the WordPress or Medium again, but I'm not gonna lie to myself. I'm not gonna keep updating. So
yeah, no, that's fair. I was on Medium for a while, and then I actually switched off it. I just didn't like the whole model. It's like you're publishing through their thing. You have that whole paywall thing. You can publish stuff for free, but you're limited. And yeah, I got away from Medium. Everybody's going to judge me for saying this. I'm a software engineer, folks, and I bought Squarespace. I do not host my own site anymore.
I mean, I was using WordPress, and when I was helping someone create their podcast site and I was a part of it, I was like, we're going to use Squarespace. 'Cause I don't want to do it. I'm not trained in, web design, and I don't want to have to do that part.
I didn't either. It was like, I just didn't want to mess with it. It's like, I want to sit down, write a blog post, done, publish.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to do it for years, and it was like a super nerdy thing to do, like you have your own site self-hosted on Nginx with, your home server. And it's like, not anymore. I don't have enough time for that anymore.
Right.
You mentioned helping out with podcasts. Do you do any podcasting yourself?
Yeah. So it's not anything technical.
That's
so
cool.
I am. Yeah. So I am on a podcast called Nagazo Noir Network. So it's all women, all Black women. And we talked about, we usually say we talk about nerdy stuff. So we talk about from TV to movies, current events, video games. I talk about like Korean dramas because I am addicted to Korean dramas.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I also, if you ever heard of I Need Diverse Games, I also do streaming with them. I do tabletop games with the Reclaimers. So if you go to twitch.tv/INDG, we come on every Sunday, 8 p.m. Central.
Wow, you are quite busy. That's a lot. That's cool. I mean, really, it's cool. Folks, check that out if any of that interests you, for sure. I feel like I'm going to have to go look you up now and be like, that sounds like a lot of cool stuff. So.
Yeah. So they're trying to convince me to do a tech podcast, and I'm just like, I don't want to. I don't know if I want to do all that.
Awesome. Well, Jen, I'd like to thank you tonight for joining me on this episode of the Lambda Show. I'm going to wrap up and close off here, and thank you, folks, for joining for this episode. Again, for other episodes past or upcoming in the future, please check out lambda.show is our website. You can also find us on Apple iTunes. We are on, a handful of other services and stores as well. We are not currently on Spotify, but hopefully soon. Spotify does not allow video. Spotify, fix that. And thanks again, Jen, for joining us. Really, really appreciated this chance to sit down and catch up and talk with you over some of these topics.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's good to talk to you again.
It is. And we can chat for a few minutes after if you have time. I'm gonna end the recording here.